And collisions are not going to be improved by doing concentric work. Collisions are going to be improved by doing eccentric and isometric work. And that's why it forms the basis of everything. Then we get specific with it.
That was Steffan Jones, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week's guest is fast bowling coach Steffan Jones. Steffan is a trailblazing coach integrating cutting-edge strength and conditioning, motor learning, and biomechanical concepts into his work. Steffan is the founder of Pacelab and has coached and consulted internationally, and he's been a multi-time guest on this podcast. For today's episode, Steffan digs into isometric training as his base layer of strength for athletic performance and skill development. He talks about isometrics on the level of both long duration as well as overcoming, how to mix them and combine them with skill development in fast bowling and beyond, as well as talking about complex training, pre-fatigue strategies, collision-based training concepts, and much more. It was awesome having Steffan back on the show. Let's get on to the episode. Steffan, it is awesome to have you back on the show. I know it's been a really long time, and I know we probably have a little bit to catch up on, and I know you're traveling all over the place, so I'm glad we could make this happen today.
Yeah, no, firstly, it's a huge honor to be on there. And I think I've probably listened to about 50 podcasts since we last met. I think it was just around the COVID time. Yeah, and I've cancelled a few times. So sorry for that. It is busy, as you know, traveling everywhere. But this podcast is the number one in my eyes. I've learned so much. So kudos to you as well, Joel.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you, Steffan. And, one of the things that I really enjoy about your work is that it's output-based. It's based on what does the gun read, but it also infuses so much of the spectrum, the available spectrum of how we train athletes. And I know you're really big into motor learning, how we learn. And that's just a bridge I'm always looking to, or a gulf I'm always looking to connect or because I think a lot of people have problems with the language but if you can instantly connect it into, okay, here's the training program, here's the outcome, here's the goal, I think it makes it a lot easier. So I'm really excited to get into those elements today. And the first question I have, and I know it's been a while, and I know you post this stuff all the time, but just for people listening, if they haven't heard about it or are not familiar with it, but a summary as best you can in a short, condensed manner of your skill stability model as that overarching umbrella of how you approach improving someone's fast bowling speed.
Okay, so the skill stability paradigm is a model I use to isolate the key sort of anchor points. And again, what you'll find is my terminology has been sort of taken from other sources as such, and I try to connect the dots and make it simpler because, as I said, I've listened to your podcast and there's some smart cookies on there. So I don't profess to be in those fields, but I think I'm the guy in the middle that connects the dots between the gym and the transfer. So I'm the transfer of training guy. So the anchor points, like Altis called the foundational anchor points, there are key points in my skill, fast bowling action, that are constant. They happen however you bowl, whatever style you have, whatever technique you have. So what I've done is I've designed a model to train those key positions. So they would be the impulse stride, back foot contact, front foot contact, and release position in bowling. And then I designed the skill stability, which is basically you hold a position through isometric, mainly yielding isometric. So what Alex Natera would call iso holds. Then we go to sort of static at the end of it. So overcoming isos. because you can recruit 10% more muscle fibers with an isometric contraction, which is why I love doing it for technical work. Then we go to the dynamic tier. Then we go to the ballistic tier. Then we go to the reactive specific tier. So it's a pyramid. Again, as you'll see in my stuff, we got Bondarchuk entwined in there. We got DB Hammer entwined in there. Eareg, all of it. Charlie Francis's work is in there. And I've come up with a training system that hopefully makes it easy for a coach who through coach's eye would look at a bowler, would identify which anchor point is flawed as such. Then there's a system to go through it. We hold, we have some movement, then there's more movement, and then it's specific. And it works.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah. And one of the just awesome things about training is there's, like, as humans, we're complex and there's so much, and even, for me, I'm listening to you read those off, and I'm like, this is so cool. These are all like, DB Hammer system and a lot of the motor learning. These are such strong influences, and it changes the way you see everything. But yet I could picture myself at age 23, and I might have, I might have been like, okay, isometric, I think I know that, and so it's like, in some ways with when you have a complex system, I think it's an interesting thought practice to almost reduce, if we're talking motor learning, reduce those degrees of freedom down to, okay, you're only holding the steering wheel. And one of the things, as you were saying, if you had, and maybe this is like a little thought experiment. So if all you had was isometrics and fast bowling, and you don't have anything else, tell me a little bit about where you might start in light of some of those key positions, because I think you could then relate to sprinting, acceleration. You like, if you're working acceleration, all you can do is push in certain positions and then sprint as fast as possible, and okay, you're done. You've sprinted 8 times and you aren't getting faster. Okay, you dropped off and whatnot. Tell me a little bit about what your approach to fast bowling would be if all you had is isometrics, or maybe that's the first layer, and we can go into that, just because I think that first layer of understanding, that's a great place for people to start no matter where they're coming in. So let's dig into expanding on that, and then we can talk about some of the rest of it.
So I think, I made a post about this a while ago, actually, that I'm a big fan of isometrics, and I've learned a lot over the years. I did actually a bit for Alex Natera's course, I think. And I believe that isometrics are ideal for those connectors. So the anchor points, then the skill itself connects the dots. I think training through sort of training the contractile elements can tend to confuse the system, cause some sort of issues with coordination, and you can get it wrong. But you can't get isometric wrong, because there's your position. Hold it for time, hold it for intensity, and then do the skill. So what we're trying to do is train the high threshold motor units in that key point to make it stronger. So as the name suggests, it's an anchor point. And the bits between, it probably would be the fluctuators that make the individual look different in their style. But if we do too much weight training, Davis's law and fascia, that we could talk all day about that causes sort of confusion. And I think that by keeping it simple, these are your points, hold them or push against something that doesn't move, get strong, stable in that position. We can then add time, we can then add density, intensity, load, variability, but then let the skill take care of itself. I think strength and conditioning is in a sort of a key place at the minute. There's lots of theories going around, lots of theories on fascia, lots of theories on variability, aquabag. I see a lot of aquabag work being done on the Instagram, and I'm going, actually, do you know why you're doing it? Because that's the main thing. You don't use aquabag to get strong.
Yeah.
I use aquabag to warm up. So that's how I would use isometrics. It gets rid of the noise. And it gets rid of the sort of the vulnerability that could happen by doing the wrong training method. It just fix your position and do the skill.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned, because I'll draw this into like just very general strength.
Yeah.
Is you had mentioned, I think it was the first podcast, may have been the second, but just something as simple as having someone do an isometric overcoming incline bench press. So they're just pushing against a fixed resistance, or maybe it's a functional isometric. Either way, short duration, max iso push. You get that activation, just pure activation, not specific in some regards. It's just the area, and then you go throw, and you can get that instant increase in velocity. And that it doesn't get much simpler than that. It's simpler than a water bag. Even it's simpler than let's do these technical cueing or pieces like that. And I think about even the most baseline thing we can do is physical training, like push-ups, right, or squats, and regardless of if you're a fast bowling coach, high jump coach, a pole vault, or whatever it is, swimming, you have that baseline of strength. And I was listening to, you mentioned DB Hammer and the inevitable Jay Schrader influence on that, and I was just listening to a podcast. Tony Holler and Dan Fichter with Adam Archuleta, and they were talking about, Adam was talking about some Jay-influenced circuits that he was just doing in the weight room with, I think, football players or whatever. And I know Jay's system, it's very human-specific. They talk about not really being specific to a sport. And Adam was talking about his circuit, and his circuit was just that, what you were saying, was the base. It was like do a isometric push-up hold, or I think it was like clap push-ups, but then you go and do like an iso bench press, I think, but it had some dynamic piece to it. But you could just as easily do iso push-ups and then clap push-ups. And it was like a circuit, 20 minutes of that, and then it was like 20 minutes of iso rear foot elevated split squat body weight, and then go do 3 Bulgarian dynamic jumps, so it's like iso, then dynamic, and iso and dynamic. And then there was one other piece to it that he was talking about. Yeah.
That is my training. That's what I did this morning.
Yeah.
This morning. And I'm just going to do a video about it, actually. So I would call it a power circuit, because obviously with isometrics, you don't get muscle trauma. So it's a great way to potentiate before your skill.
Yeah.
So I did isometric mid-thigh pull. I did a military press, overcoming iso into pins. Then I did a hand clean press. So we combined those two into a dynamic movement, and then I did a med ball and a jump. And that is my training, because the older I get, because of my neurotype as well, I just like to do the basics. I want to be in and out of that gym in 20 minutes. I want to do the stuff that I know that works. I don't want to create stress to my body by stuff that might work, a scattergun approach.
Yeah.
I know my incline press works. I know my snatch, my hand clean, and the jumps and the throws. Everything else, is accessory at best. And so back to the general and the specific, because it is important that isometrics is always in my program. That's a given. So, but people forget the reason why you train off the field is you cover what you don't cover on the field as such. So if I'm bowling, if I'm doing the skill of bowling, I don't want to be doing drill work. I just want to be doing the general stuff. So that's when I would do mid-thigh pull and incline press, overcoming iso, and I will superset that with the skill itself. So the skill is my priority. And then when I'm not bowling, when I'm off season, I need to replicate the bowling. So that's when I do the skill stability. So skill stability paradigm doesn't work. The closer I get to the season, the less I do it, because I'm covering the blanks before. And this is where people go wrong. They'll think, well, you're getting closer to the season, so you need to get more specific. No.
Yeah.
Closer I get to the season, my specific is my skill.
Yeah.
I don't want to be spending time in the gym anymore. I just need to get what I need out of the gym, which is train the high threshold motor units, some structural integrity work, some rate of force development. So it's, it's a swing, it's a pendulum with isometrics, but it stays in the program.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of those things too, where and I have another thought on the isometrics and some of the modes, but that's definitely where I've gone, is that I think for people who are in athletic performance, strength, and conditioning, this is a very common, it's great at first, but it can become a pitfall in the sense of the over specificity in the weight room. Like, all right, we're going to do all these super specific muscle phases, specific contraction types. That's great. But at some point, you actually have to like surrender to being more general a little bit in the weight room, because if everything is like specific to the max, then it almost can choke out, I think, some room for adaptation of the specific skill on a level. Like, you have to at some point just be like, hey, no, the stuff in the gym is a little more general now because everything on the field is so demanding and so specific. So it's like, how can I recover that in the gym? Maybe there's just a hit of isometrics. I think that's certainly an important piece to it.
Yeah, I think the main message is simple: is that the only true specific thing you can do is your skill itself, which you are training to do. So the quicker you can get to doing that, then frequency of practice, frequency of skill. That's what it's about, especially for my skill. It's we have too many gym programs that don't transfer.
Yeah.
There's not even a sort of neutral transfer. Some of it is sort of negative transfer. So, but that's what I do. I keep it simple, and that's how I trained. And we were talking off air about Thibodeau.
Yeah.
And he actually did my training program in 2007, and I've gone back to that now. And you and I know that you tend to get sort of your eyes turned by certain coaches, and then you try that method, but then ultimately you just go back to what works. And for me, it was it's three people. Well, it's four people really. You've got Thibodeau, you've got DB Hammer, whoever he was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've got Triphasic, Cal, and then you've got Bondarchuk. I don't move far away from those.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I outside of that, with the isometrics, I had this thought, and this is definitely where I like thinking of dials in training. So you can take an isometric and you can dial it all the way up in intensity to it overcoming, like Bob Hoffman style, like push 3 seconds against a movable resistance, and hopefully you can measure it too. That's great. And then you could dial it all the other way. You could do a 5-minute extreme iso lunge or something. That's all the other way. I don't think it has to be turned that far in many cases. And then you have the same thing with the skill. You have your maximal singular output or a tempo version of whatever you're doing. So if it's sprinting, it could be a 10-meter fly all the way out to running 6 200s at a slower pace. And I find the combinations there are interesting because you have like the max, okay, we can do some max isos and then some max sprinting, and that complements pretty well. But then back to the Adam Archuleta and Jay Schrader inspired stuff is doing like a longer isometric, because that's like almost completes. You could also look at it as a triangle. You have the max isometric, the max skill, but then you have the recovering thing, at the top of the triangle. That could be the long iso hold recovers it. And I think that's why that circuit works that Adam talks about. It's like you do the iso hold, the long iso hold, and you kind of recover the system a little bit. You kind of recalibrate, and then you go back to the explosiveness. So I wanted to ask you how, like, if looking at those dials, so just on this very simple base layer, we have our max isos, our skill. Tell me a little bit about more the tempo or the longer iso hold or the recovery, the work capacity side of that end of things.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people don't understand that the long isos, when you get fit enough, strong enough, resilient enough, they're actually recovery. Yeah. So they are used at the end. So they could be used at the end of your game to get everything back to sort of normality as such. And Christian Thibodeau's EKYs, they're exactly the same. And so I do them in two ways. So I would do them. So I would start, depending where you are in the phase of training. So for example, if I'm doing yielding isometric, so it would be, say, a front foot contact hold, which is you're holding the anchor point of front foot contact. I would do that for 30 seconds to begin with, to create time, to build the mind to muscle connection. And then, but I don't spend too long in there. And then I go through the load, the intensity, the density, the volume, and I go through that process. and variability. That's why a lot of people see me with aqua bags
Mm-hmm.
and creating perturbations that way. So that is the start of the journey. Soon as they can hold, and here's the thing, soon as they can hold 2 times their body weight on a Smith machine in that front foot contact position, I know that they now have the action capacity along with your basic hip thrust, trap bar deadlift, lunges, Peterson step up. Now they have the action capacity, the potential to hold that position. However, with sort of acceleration momentum going into that is not a guarantee. So that's where I think my strength as a coach is that finding that blending phase, finding the phase where good things happen, where you can transfer change. So we hold a position. What I say to my bowlers in wherever I go in the world is like, if you can hold a position, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to block with 8 times your body weight running in. That doesn't transfer that way. You have to transfer it. So holding on a Monday and bowling on a Friday, that's not going to transfer. So that's where my complex work comes in.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my sort of skill specific circuit comes in. The blending of it all, the layering of a skill with a hold to create the mind to muscle connection. I've held a position. Okay, now I need to put that position into a slightly more forceful environment. So I will jog through it. Again, this is where 1080 comes in, and I fully get that a lot of people wouldn't have these equipments, but 1080 is outstanding because it is the best transfer of training tool that's out there for me. So for example, I don't want to sort of talk too long at this point, but it is important because hold a position, front foot contact, hold 2 times your body weight. We progress from there to then push in against pins with 4 stacks to get the numbers. Then we do some depth drops with it, altitude drops, and then we have some sort of reactive work, some perturbation stuff. So we'll go through that complex. But what 1080 does, because you are running in at 7.5 meters per second, 20% of ball velocity comes from your runner. So you need to be able to attack the crease. Many bowlers can't. And it's important to understand that a bowler's run up is a tempo run for a sprinter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's like nowhere near max effort. But if I'm getting somebody to hold, I put down 5-10 kilogram loaded on 1080. They now given max intent. They try and go fast, but the load itself, because we're pulling them back, the intensity is lower. And I never could go below this 80% mark that Bondarchuk used to talk about. Anything below 80% intensity, the brain sees as a different skill.
Yeah.
So my skill work is about 80%, which is what it's called subprime layering, I call it. So that's how I do it. I hold and I put it into movement in the smallest transfer window possible. 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute. So it's contrast training for you and I.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things too with like the skill and that sweet spot of skill acquisition, I think is a good, it's something that people don't talk about. I mean, I know in sprinting, there's been like, okay, should we sprint maximally? Is sub-max the best, 90% or whatnot? And I remember I was just reading, because I was just doing a little research on range throwing and track to put together some pieces for an article. And Bondarchuk had said it was something like the sweet spot of skill is like 87 and 92% of your throw. And I think that's really important to understand, because I think it's just so easy to have a strength program that's too many directions or takes too much of the resources up. And then you go and do your skill and it's just all 100% and there's not any real like mindful motor learning. Yeah. And if you can just start with isometrics and then some reasonable simple constraints, and most of the efforts are in that 87 to 92%, you're going to get a lot done, and you're going to allow the athlete to work on their own and learn a lot as well.
Yeah. So it's and that's where people go wrong, is that missing that point really, is that it's too it's not hard enough for the brain to give a damn.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's not. The brain is thinking, "What am I doing?" Because the last time I did this skill, I was protecting myself. I was all the Golgi tendon, the vestibular system was all sort of protecting me because you were running in at 7 meters per second. You were jumping in the air with both feet off the ground. So now I'm thinking I'm flying. Then I'm landing 4 times force on back foot, 8 on front foot. And now you want me to walk through? I'm like, no. It's I know it's a simplified way of looking at it, but that's how. And for me, fast bowling is the biggest, the danger, the threat the brain can sort of cope with, because we are sprinting, jumping sideways, landing. We're doing that 6 times, and we're doing that multiple times across the day. When you pitch, whether you're a reliever or a starter, you pitch certain amount. Javelin, you have a long rest. Triple jump, you have a long rest. So fast bowling is a unique skill. It's really intense, and that's why I delve really deeply into it, because it's a complex skill, and it's my job as a coach to simplify it.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think with pitching is an interesting piece. I'll hold this thought because I just want to touch on this quickly. I think this is important, especially with the theme of base layer, isometrics, and I think about skills that are a little bit more elastic and skills that are a little bit more muscular. Like, to my knowledge, and I'm sure this exists without question, but like if I'm a shot putter in track and field, there's definitely more muscular force involved in that than throwing a fast pitch. I think hey, can you bench press over 400 pounds? That's like and of course, to bench over 400, you got to have the isometric strength in there too. It's almost like it's just simpler to just say, well, just bench over 400. But then, and even like a standing vertical jump or something, you just have to squat a lot. It's kind of it's similar enough that maybe you don't have to get into the isometric piece. But then, as soon as you get into stuff that's a little more elastic and complex, and there's a position involved, I think that is a point where, okay, well, maybe now we have to be more specific with how the isometric is presented. And maybe I think sprinting is always this common middle ground because we all deal with it in some way, shape, or form. But I think about Chris Korfist's hammer strength machine in his basement that he did a lot of isometric split squat on. And I think he did other like dynamic stuff. But that isometric split squat was kind of his base for that. And, it could be acceleration, it could be top end. But I would put sprinting in as probably closer to that elastic and fast bowling than it is necessary. I mean, it's all elastic, right? But like probably a little bit closer than like max force on a shot put to a degree, even though shot putting is certainly elastic too. But, it's interesting to think about maybe how things change. The more skillful, the more high velocity, the more elastic, the more important it is to have some of these isometric baselines in addition to the other strength you're doing, be it that split squat that Chris Korfist had, the front foot, the front foot block on the Smith strength machine, those things.
Yeah. So for me, isometric is always the limiter. So it's the connector between concentric and eccentric. So and most people fail on sort of on ground contact time. So a lot of people spend too long in that coupling time, the amortization phase, and that's why I place sort of isometric as a premium. And here's the thing to you, for sports skills, I honestly believe that it's eccentric and isometric training. Concentric training for me I do it, I prescribe it, mainly probably to keep sort of people happy. But I don't think there's a lot of value in concentric work in sport. The skill happens too fast for it. Yeah. But to get to the concentric phase, you need to be able to store and use that energy and control it. That's why eccentric training and isometric form a lot of my training. So if I was to give you a breakdown, it would be isometric is the base.
Yeah.
Then we have eccentric shot work, jumping, my piezoelectric work, my bag slap, turning, switching on and off, and then the sports skill. Then the skill. My skill is my concentric, whether it's with a weighted ball, whether it's with Lila Exogen suit, it's the concentric. Then around that, then there's small corrective exercise. So your high rep 1x20s.
Yeah.
I would do a 1x20 on corrective work on my calf, on my bicep, because the bigger there's a sweet spot of upper arm mass that it will increase your arm speed.
Yeah.
And arm speed is the number one KPI for fast bowling. Number one. But very few people train for it. And you have two windows of opportunity in your life, the speed windows, your 7 to 9 and your 11, 12, 10, 12, around there. That's when you do the speed. So I don't, concentric can be used a young athlete, but pro athletes, they spend too much time on concentric work, which doesn't transfer, in my opinion.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Lila Exogen Wearable Resistance. Exogen is used by coaches such as Randy Huntington and Chris Corfist and is an incredible tool in overloading the angular, momentum, and speed aspect of human movement. You can get 25% off of Exogen sleeves by heading to lilateam.com and using the code JustFly25. Yeah. I mean, and that is where I think, like you mentioned, 1x20, if you do have a high-level athlete, I think just making it 1x20 is like super general, because it's like, as in terms of the concentric world, like compared to doing a set of 3, a heavy set of 3 or a 5, that's intense and not specific contraction specific, or, whatever. It is stimulating without question, but it's more like at that point, it's like, what can I do to re-expand your possibilities and just get a lot of general type stuff? And then it almost makes sense that the more output driven the sport is, like if it's basketball, you have to do a lot of different skills. Maybe it makes more sense to have more of the strength, be a 1x20, maybe a few isometrics here and there, versus something that's pure output. Okay, now we're gonna have a lot more isometrics as a bridge into that purest output.
Athletes are kinesthetic learners. They feel. So 1x20 works for them because they get the pump.
It's a big part of it.
It makes them feel as if they've worked, and that's why a lot of sort of coach S&C coaches wouldn't prescribe arms for pictures or flies, pecs, and I do that. So I do. So my training is a mixture of a lot of different things based on what the athlete needs, and that's ultimately it.
I think a lot of it too. It's funny because I'm always trying to these days. There's the very like scientific end of it, and then there's just kind of like the human. This feels good. I'm a human being, and I like doing this. This feels good end of it. And I think about even like watching my kids. Like I have a 13-month-old, 14-month-old. Even my 14-month-old, if she's in the basement and there's a couple of kettlebells, like she'll walk over to the little 10-pounder, kind of put her hands on it, like just to see if she could lift it, like just manipulating an object. Like there's just something fun and innately human about, am I strong enough to do this? And overcoming a force. Then it just also feels good to get a pump. And like, these are almost things that are also rewarding unto themselves in a way. So I think that, that's something I've definitely thought about a lot more, is like that pump and how that is, yes, it expands things. It's blood flow and it's expansive, but it's also just something that feels good, and there is something to that.
So I call it bulletproofing. So it just builds the body armor. And that famous video of, and I'm not for 1 minute saying that's the reason why he was fast, but that famous Usain Bolt video when he's doing some shocking hand cleans and some leg press or that sort of stuff. So clearly that's not going to help him, but there's a reason why he did it. It makes him feel good, and he's the fastest man that's ever been. And what is the purpose of training? You have cognitive and physical. If he felt good doing it, who am I to judge that, no?
Yeah, we could say Michael Jordan on machines, just training, just getting stronger, feeling good, feeling like you're going to go beat the Pistons, like that's driving you. And
sorry. So that's interesting, though. I'm a big machines fan. I'm a big fan of machines. And so if I have a hip dominant and a knee dominant bowler, okay? So, and your wide and narrow ISAs, and that's a great course by the way. Anyone who's listening to this, you'll have to get it. To be fair, Joel, every single thing you've done has been outstanding. So hats off to you on that as well. So the hip or knee, so your hip dominant bowlers, they don't rely on muscle. It's all about tendons and it's all about fascia. It's about short ground contact time. It's about approach work, you know, and so isometrics would be really important for them. And so for them to get the high threshold motor unit stimulus, I would do general strength. So for a hip dominant, tendon driven bowler, I would do mid side pull, a press, a pull, all isometrics, all overcoming, then do your skill. Do your skill in part or whole, overloaded, whatever. I've done it when I was at school, 8 miles per hour in 2 years. But then when I have a knee dominant bowler, a knee dominant bowler who's, has more movement in the back leg when they land, I need to strengthen that particular angle. I don't want to have to worry about stability and all that. I want to overload that muscle. Smith's machine, Smith's machine in early 2000s was probably in the garage, nobody using it. But actually, it's top three for me. It's so important.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too. So this was along with the I think I'm like, oh, I will ask this, or talking about the long duration, short duration. So with the short duration ISOs and some things that are very skill and angle specific. Tell me a little bit about the difference between and I know not everyone has access to a Smith machine. I know for high jump, the front foot, the plant action has become a lot more important to me than when I first started. And I think there's a lot of similarities in that high jump plant and then a fast bowling plant. Although there's a lot of angular differences, but I do a lot of sensory work there. I actually am not in charge of the weight room for the high school track and field athletes I work with, so I can't say, hey, we're going to go on the Smith machine and work on the plant. I do a lot of like 3D strap, like the little windy 3D strap, and they'll get the sensory feel of the plant, and then we tend to circuit that in with their takeoffs and things like that. But I was curious in terms of the sensory piece. So of like just feeling that versus overloading it max versus that existing in the actual throw. Is there any sensory that it just exists as a sensory drill, or is that the water bag? Is that where that comes in? Yeah, curious about that.
So in terms of short duration, obviously the purpose for that is for that initial contact. So and that's the thing with intra and interlimb coordination. My back foot contact does a different job to my front foot contact. So that's important. So my front foot contact is more long duration. It's more about contractile elements. It's more about creating feel. But my back foot contact, because that's a long ground contact time, my back foot contact around the ankle is short duration. And you can do the sensory motor stuff. You can close left eye, close right eye. You can do the infinity walks. I do infinity hops and all that. So you can do all that, but that's be short ISOs on ankle. But then the knee will require, because that's more muscle, the knee requires, and rate of force development will require long duration hold. So straight away there, in the base itself, I have long durations, short durations. It's short duration for intensity, short duration for speed. So it's different. And that's why, it requires knowledge for a start. Just by holding a position is not doing anything.
Yeah, there has to be, and that's the thing is like even like rehearsing the plant. Like I could have a group of jumpers, and if we're just doing body weight only, we could do a plant drill. But it has to be, you have to be getting something out of it. There has to be a stimulation. There has to be an active learning process, and obviously putting a lot of weight or holding a long time inherently makes anything stimulating. It's let's say pay attention brain. That's why I like the 3D strap. But I imagine even like a water bag as well. If you're in those types of situations, it makes the brain pay attention.
Yeah, definitely.
So
avoiding sensorial adaptation and just creating anything that keeps the brain engaged, really. Because and that's the problem with the isometrics is you've unless you've got a sort of a dynamometer or a force dex, you have no knowledge of results, so it's pretty boring, and the brain switches off as such. But obviously I use different stuff. I use G Strength and Remaker and all those, and so it's I have knowledge of results, so they can measure progress. If that goes up, I know now you are closer to be able to block when we're bowling. It's interesting with high jumps and bowling. So a high jump, your takeoff leg is actually a fast bowler's front foot contact.
Yeah, it's the long contact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, to think about that. Well, I was going to ask you as well. Do you tend to, I don't want to set this up as well, do this one or do this one? It's like, what's better? But do you tend to focus a little bit more on the isometric piece versus, let's say, extensive plyos, right? Because you could do, hey, you want to get a stiffer contact of this or whatever. Where does that play in? Because I know that those are both tools in developing joint stiffness. It seems like isometrics for like a bent knee position of the back foot would be a lot easier to get that. Curious how those work together, or your thoughts on that.
So that's positional specific isometric. Yeah. So that I would, to eliminate the degrees of freedom, and it's obviously a constraint-led approach, through all the testing that I've done and all the analysis for different new apps, Pitchwolf, and all the analysis, there are key things that the best do. So I've taken that up. I've eliminated the degrees of freedom. Now hold that position. Hold it for time or intensity, variability, or whatever. So they are skill work. So my extensive jumping, pogo jump, hopping, and all that stuff what I would do in a general session. So would be my general prep. If you think of a Bondarchuk tier, but again, if that person needs it. If I have a hip dominant bowler, tendon driven bowler, you can see them. Okay, whatever athlete they are, 70% of the time I will be working on their strengths. I will be working on what they're good at. So that would be their general work is extensive jumping, all that stuff, reactive work. Then we go up, but then the SPE and the SDE of a Bondarchuk will be skill stability. That's where it sits, and then we go competitive. But then 30% of the time, so if it's a 10-day program, 3 of those days they're working on their weaknesses. So they will then do a general exercise that the knee dominant bowler has been doing it for 70% of the time.
Got it.
So that's why you can go in the gym, and for 7 days you're doing that program, and for 7 days you're doing that. Then for 3 days swap them around. That is how I train my hip and knee dominant bowlers. But the jumping, so the ladder drills. Ladder drills have got so much stick over the years, but people forget why we do them. I like them for reactivity work, ground contact time, because ultimately, where are these kids getting the ground contact time these days? They don't jog a lot. They don't go for a long run. They don't do sort of playground work. They don't jump. They don't skip. They don't do ladders. So where are we training ankle stiffness? Where are we training the foot, which is, what is it? What it Kofi says is like 30% of the running speed comes from below the knee. So it's like, where are we doing that? So what I'm saying is everything has a place, just understanding how the individual works, how it looks, and then just doing the methods that ultimately will get my speed gun higher.
Yeah. So if you had, with the plyos and ISO type conversation, basically like athletes who are kind of over specialized, who don't do enough play, who don't have that elastic development in your program, they're going to be doing a lot more like the extensives and stuff to remediate that. But if you got like someone from, I think you wrote is like the East or West Indies or something, like one of those guys just grew up barefoot, just tendon loaded, they're probably just going to need some ISOs here and there to kind of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my program is very tailored, very specific, complicated to some, but when you end up reading the greatest book by D.B. Hammer, then complicated makes sense. And still now I still read the book, and still some of it doesn't make sense. But that's how my brain works. I'm a systems guy. I profile someone. I know what good looks like. I know what the attractors, the fluctuators are. So I identify what they need. RSI, dynamic strength index, reactive bowling index, which is a index I have for the impulse stride. And then you come up with a plan to improve those numbers. And that will be different for a lot of people, but at some stage, it will be very similar. People forget it's called general for a reason. Don't make your general strength specific. Just get stronger, get more resilient, build the engine to allow you to do your skill better.
Yeah. Yeah, with that general piece too, I think, and I have just a couple, probably have time for me one more question. I know your time's running up here, but I was just thinking with the ISO and the general strength, like what's your definition of general strength? And I think that's one of the biggest things that, the Jay Schrader, DB Hammer kind of thing, really Jay, with the isometrics and that piece added is a lot of times if we're going into athletic performance, it's based or circulates around the power lifts and Olympic lifts, which are great modalities. They're very stimulating, and especially Olympic lifts are athletic. But like if you don't have that isometric baseline, like I feel like that as soon as you go into human performance and that doesn't exist in any specific strength discipline, there should almost be a course on isometrics as the baseline, body weight, long holds, specific applications to fit with all the attractors of the different sports as needed. And then go from there, and that could even be a general, you have your general human level, long weight, long time body weight holds, and then you have all the specific applications to sport attractors. And that's just such a basic, easy place to start. And I gotta say too, I almost forgot to say this I really love that Chris Corfist hammer strength. I just do it with holding a bar under the front knee. And that is just so good. I always have people tell me, wow, I feel so fast after doing this, and it's better than, more so than for every 10 people that would tell me that, I might have one person say, oh yeah, we did a up and down split squat and I feel really fast. I think that's a good movement. There's a lot of application for that. But if you're talking just direct line transfer, that isometric is just the first place that we should start in so many ways. And I don't know, it's very easy to complicate it in directions that aren't necessarily as specific to those skills we're trying to get.
Yeah, definitely. And your YouTube video, I think it's oscillatory lunge, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
In the millions now, isn't it? That must get so many views. But yeah, but general is exactly that. What am I trying to do with it? And as you say, I believe, which is why isometric is the bottom of my skill stability paradigm. There's a reason for that. It's what holds everything up, and everything else is built it. Because I need to teach people to be able to stop. I need to be able to teach people to control collisions, because bowling is the most sort of stressful thing you can do. And the collisions involved in bowling are incredible. And collisions are not going to be improved by doing concentric work. Collisions are going to be improved by doing eccentric and isometric work. And that's why it forms the basis of everything. Then we get specific with it. So I'm not like, so it's a difficult one, right? It's you got SSCs who want their pennies worth, who want to show that they're good, so want to improve the number. Then you got the skills coach, the sort of who wants their penny worth. But actually, both are really important. But ultimately, you want to get the athlete to do their skill as quickly as possible, fully recovered as many times in the week. Whatever training you do, that is your fundamental sort of question to yourself. I'm going to train this guy now, and I want to make sure that he's going to do his skill and he's able to do it in the peak condition, because that's what he gets paid for. I'm talking like athletes here now, and I went to Arizona Cardinals with Buddy and Kyle and Shay, and that's where I'm going to end up. I'm going to end up in NFL or Major League Baseball. That's my ambition. I'll do 2 years in cricket, and then I'm out in America.
Yeah. No, I can't wait for that. Hopefully we can actually, meet in person at some point if you're over here enough. Yeah. Just really quickly, kind of finishing up is, I know we want to talk about complexes, but this is if we're talking fundamental foundational first layer, I had asked Chris Corfist and Dan Fichter, this was basically like they do a lot of complexes. Like they're old, want to get fast DVDs and stuff where here's all these complexes. But I believe, this is what I believe they were kind of getting onto, is when you first started to teach more like intensity and intention, I think they would have just more simple workouts. Like, hey, just go run. We're just going to go run 4, 5, or 6 fly 10s, or maybe to drop off, just so you get an idea of, intention and intensity and just going. And then I think it would move more into, complexes and things like that. But, it's in your system. And I will say, my mind, I love complexes. Like, that's mostly what I want to do. But then I'm always trying to think, okay, is an athlete fully ready to do 3 more things here? Would we be better off just doing one thing in a serial format today? I'm curious where your take is in terms of one or the other.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I did a post today, I think somewhere, but I'm really happy with giving athletes of any age an advanced method.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, the advanced method is only as stressful as the power output they can provide. So,
Yeah.
for example, my 10-year-old daughter, she's 15 now, but she was doing depth jumps and all that. That people are going, well, look at that depth jump. But doing a press up, okay, a hold, press up, hold, turning around and supersetting that with a chest pass. So that is a contrast. But that's not a hard contrast.
Yeah, very simple.
But
yeah.
we are exactly, but it is a contrast. So we are transferring sort of that heightened state of doing a press up into an explosive action, which is what sport is about. I think we get too carried away by doing okay, body weight, then we go dumbbells, then we go barbells, then we go advanced. So I do, I have a booklet for complex training, and I remember Don Chu's book in 1995. I was doing like that in contrast. So I've been doing contrast training for 30 years. That's why I'm comfortable in what I'm doing, whether that's Bulgarian, Russian, French contrast. You got your Gunther complex, you got your second generation contrast, all that, and my skill stability one then. So, but the key understanding, like Thibodeau did in one of his posts, with your podcast, was if you have an athlete who can transfer easy, then you don't need 4. You only need, here's the thing. So that's why, as people are probably listening to me going, oh, gee whiz, he's scatty. But actually, if you think about it, I said earlier, for my hip dominant athlete, who is that athletic, natural guy, I said I do a mid-thigh pull with a skill.
Yeah.
So there we go. But if I have a knee dominant bowler who takes a long time to get warm, whose fast twitch or their intermediate fibers do most of the work, they never get to their fast twitch fibers. So then a pre-fatigue complex would be great for them. And they go, really? Do a set of 10 squats and then expect them to bowl? Yeah, it works. Do a 200-meter run and then expect them to do an explosive bowl. But have you tried that? That is such a great feeling. And Franz Bosch was saying, wasn't he? If you fatigue the contractile elements, the connective tissue will do all the work. So then you get your knee dominant bowler to look more athletic. What you'll find is your muscle driven knee dominant bowler, and they're all around there, actually look better with fatigue in their system. I genuinely believe that. So in answer to your question, I always do complex training. You'll never find a program that I've designed that hasn't got a complex in it, complex or contrast, whatever age, whatever training age. Just the exercise selection is what makes it advanced, not the concept.
Yeah, I do think it is a thing where, like, I like comparing this all to music. Like the idea of, how many notes in a row or up a scale can you hit before it doesn't sound like music anymore, and novelty. And I think you need to learn the scales. You need to understand the scales. But once you have that, you have to make music, And I just think about that. And it becomes art, And once you get used to the art, you get addicted to it, And so that's definitely, that's definitely the creative, such a true creative piece in it all, without question.
Yeah, I saw, like, and I was thinking this as well. So my sort of skill set and the skill acquisition and skill execution element of my coaching is built around fundamental strength and conditioning knowledge. I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that all technical, tactical coaches need an understanding of what's happening, understanding of progressive overload, understanding, the limiting factors. Why am I, why is my quarterback not able to throw accurately? There is a fundamental reason for that. And you wouldn't know what it is, you know, that most people would go, well, just practice, keep practicing. Well, there's no reason for the body to do it differently if you don't change what's moving that arm. And that requires S&C knowledge. So I say, and I'll finish with this, is that everyone has their own style. So how you built your archetypes, your anthropometry, your hip and knee, wide ISA, narrow ISA, whatever, you're built that way, high cruel index, whatever. Then how you look when you do your skill, and you need to allow an athlete to do their skill, a child to do their skill first before you think about correcting it. Too many coaches do drills before they see the person doing their skill. So that's the technique. That's how they work. To change technique, you have to change the mechanisms that move the limbs. And that requires S&C knowledge, requires the muscle, the tendons, the ligaments. And that's why, you have silos in sport. So silos are not a good place to be.
Yeah. Yeah, any technique will always be limited with that. It's like you're always living in a bubble without that human physiology and structural knowledge that goes behind it.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, thank you so much, Steffan, for being on the show again. I appreciate you making the time. I'm glad. Sorry I took you a few minutes past, but I'm glad we could get the window in. It was awesome talking to you. And thanks for catching up and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Our pleasure. Keep up the great work. I'll be listening to your next podcast as well.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I'll see you next week.